The Jets are reportedly on the verge of making their two smartest moves of the offseason. Let's discuss today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, June 2nd, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangreneNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. On today's show, we're going to discuss comments offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand made near the end of last week. He offered a hint about what this Jets offense is going to look like. We're going to discuss how much Garrett Wilson and Gardner could make if they receive contract extensions from the New York Jets. But before that, there's a reason we're discussing figures for Garrett Wilson and Gardner. There was big news that broke late last week from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler. He was doing an interview on the Jake Asman show, and he reported that the Jets have made an initial contract extension offer to both Garrett Wilson and Gardner. Two star players who just recently became eligible to sign contract extensions have received initial offers from the New York Jets. And I think if you're a Jets fan, this is the news you want to hear. We're still very early in the Aaron Glenn-Darren Muji regime. We don't really know whether they're going to succeed or not. So we probably overanalyze everything they do in this first offseason. But this is the type of thing that I think inspires confidence, because this is priority number one for the New York Jets in the 2025 offseason. Of course, you want to improve. Of course, the quarterback position is critical, but locking up your star players long-term is NFL team building 101. And it's an area where the New York Jets have struggled throughout Woody Johnson's ownership. And you can go all the way back to 2000 when the Jets traded Keyshawn Johnson. When the Jets have had star players, the negotiations have turned very, very acrimonious, and needlessly so in many cases. And the Jets have had a lot of talented players leave as a result of that. Even when they've worked out longer-term deals, it got too dramatic. I mean, you forget about this stuff, but the Quinnen Williams contract took way too long. There have been other instances where, it felt like we were reaching a breaking point, then the Jets reach a deal with a player at the last minute. Sometimes these acrimonious contract extension negotiations work out for the Jets. Jets are actually better off that things broke off between them and Jamal Adams 5 years ago, because the Jets traded Adams, whose career took a nosedive, and used the two picks they got for him to draft Garrett Wilson and draft Elijah Vera Tucker. Sometimes when contract negotiations turn acrimonious, you get something good in return, even though you trade a good player. That's what happened when the Jets traded John Abraham in 2006. They got a draft pick that turned into Nick Mangold. But it's just become too difficult for the New York Jets to work these deals out with star players. And a big part of the reason is that they're never proactive in their negotiations with these players. They always wait till the last minute. And the closer you get to a player's free agency, the more leverage the player gets. You want to do these deals right now for Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, because both players are 2 years away from free agency. So they're a long way from getting that potential payday if they wait all the time it takes to get to free agency. If you do a deal now, you can give them life-changing money. And in exchange for that, because they're 2 years away from free agency, because they have a long wait, they'll probably be willing to leave some money on the table. And even if they're not, the way the NFL salary cap is working right now, it's going to keep going up. So the longer you wait to work out a long-term deal with Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, the more expensive it's going to be, because they're going to, if the cap goes up next year, their contract's going to get more expensive because they're going to want more money. So it's important to be proactive. It's something the Jets have really lacked for a long time. You talk team building 101 in the NFL. The Jets have done the opposite of smart team building over the last 15 years. And it's a big reason that they have had so many struggles. The NFL is kind of interesting from the standpoint, there's really only one way to build your team. In other leagues, like, there's a lot of different ways you can build your team. The NBA, you can stockpile assets, you can try and score big in free agency. You can build through the draft, but it's not the only way you build a championship team in the NBA. Same thing with baseball. You can sign good free agents, you can work out trades. The NFL, you have to build through the draft, and you have to keep the players who are high-end players who you drafted. And the reason for that is quite simple. Compare the NFL with other leagues. In the NBA, LeBron James becomes a free agent. He's best player in the league. He becomes a free agent. In baseball, Aaron Judge became a free agent. I know he stayed with the Yankees, but he was available for a while. And you see other high-end players in both leagues hit the open market, guys who are franchise-changing talents. Doesn't happen in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes doesn't become a free agent. Joe Burrow doesn't become a free agent. Josh Allen doesn't become a free agent. That's just not the way the NFL works. And there are lots of reasons for that. When you talk about the franchise tag, which allows teams to keep their top player who's about to become a free agent each year, you could also discuss just the nature of the NFL, where players are potentially one play away from suffering a career-ending injury, which makes them more likely to be accepting a deal when their team offers a longer-term deal, rather than wait. The longer you wait, the more opportunity there is to suffer that kind of career-altering injury. And this means that there's a premium on drafting quality players, developing quality players, and keeping those quality players. And the Jets, over the last 15 years, they have not committed to that. With the Jets, it's always been trying to find a shortcut. I mean, how many times have we seen over the last 15 years the Jets GM get himself on the hot seat and then get desperate and throw a ton of money at a bunch of huge names who are on the downside of their careers? It's happened over and over and over. And never more true than the last 2 years with the whole Aaron Rodgers saga. Tyron Smith comes in. The Jets keep Dwayne Brown, Mike Williams, Hassan Reddick. The list goes on. But it happened before. It happened with when the Jets threw money at Trumaine Johnson. It happened when they threw money at Le'Veon Bell. You want to go back far enough, you could talk about when the Jets threw a lot of money to bring Darrelle Revis back from New England. And, all the moves Mike McCagnon made is that first offseason. Mike McCagnon threw a ton of money at that in 2015. It worked for a year, and then all those guys got old all at once. The Jets have never committed to building through the draft. The only time they've semi-committed to doing it was Joe Douglas's first couple of years. And that's the only time in this entire era where the Jets have actually shown steady improvement. There's only been twice over the last 14 years where the Jets have improved their win total 2 straight years. That was in 2021 when they improved to 4 wins from 2, and then 2022 when they improved to 7 wins from 4. And those were the years the Jets committed through the draft. And that's when they started drafting these guys: Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Jermaine Johnson, Breece Hall, Michael Carter II, AVT, to a lesser extent, Damian Sherwood, because Sherwood didn't really break out until last season. But the thing that's been frustrating, the thing that was so frustrating to me about the last 2 years is the Jets had a plan that was actually, making progress. And despite the misses, and Joe Douglas had a lot of misses, despite all the misses, the fact they were committing to draft picks, the fact that they were committed to building through the draft, those first couple of years with Douglas, showed results. And then the Jets just went away from the plan, and they went back to classic Jets. Let's throw a ton of money at big names on the downside of their career and hope it works out. And it never really does. In this league, it's all about drafting your own players, developing your own players, and keeping your own players. And despite that fact, the Jets keep doing the opposite of that and then act shocked when they don't get good results. So perhaps this is the turning of the page. Perhaps the Jets are starting off on a new foot with this new regime in Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, and they are going to start investing in the guys that are here, because there's a good foundation here. What they have to do is fill in around the foundation. You do that through drafting even more good young players, because the class of 2021 and 2022, they are aging. They're not really young anymore. They're now guys who are going to be in their prime of their careers, which is good. And they're going to make more money as a result. So now you got to fill those guys in. Those guys will become the leaders of your team if you keep them around. If you fill in the roster around them with young talent, we could actually have something here. We could actually be moving forward. The first step is re-signing these players. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, it's easy to say re-sign these players. How much money is it going to cost? Well, for Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, let's be honest, it's going to cost quite a bit. But both of these players are worth it. We'll figure out dollar figures, and I'll explain why these are good investments for the Jets as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. In fact, the NBA finals are here, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. And FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Of course, if you're in New York, you may be a Knicks fan. Sorry, guys. I mean, you had a great run. Of course, it came to an end at the hands of the Indiana Pacers. But if you still want to be in on the action during the NBA Finals, FanDuel is the place to be. Or if you've turned to the NFL, you're getting ready for the season, Jets 5.5 wins over under on FanDuel. You think they're going to top that? Again, FanDuel is the place to get in on the action. Are you new to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you every day. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported late last week that the Jets have begun contract extension negotiations with Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner. In fact, the Jets have made both players an initial offer, so negotiations are ongoing. It's a good thing. We won't celebrate fully until a deal is done, but it's good that this is what the Jets are doing right now. It's good that this is on the Jets' minds. It's what I was hoping would happen this offseason. After your third year in the NFL, you become eligible to sign a long-term contract. You have to wait 3 years. You can't sign a contract in after your first year or your second year. You do have to wait 3 years. But Sauce and Garrett are now both eligible for contract extensions. Of course, with 2 years remaining on their rookie contracts, because the Jets picked up the fifth-year option for both, the Jets theoretically could wait on this. It's not urgent because neither is scheduled to hit free agency for 2 years. But I like the fact that Jets are being proactive right now because it's important to keep your core players in place. So how much money will a contract extension cost for Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner? Well, there are a couple of ways we can estimate this. Let's start with Sauce Gardner because Rich Cimini of ESPN actually came out with a report late last week, which wasn't entirely surprising. He indicated that Sauce Gardner's team is viewing the contract Derek Stingley Jr. signed with the Houston Texans as a benchmark. And it's not a surprise because Stingley and Sauce were drafted in the same year. In fact, they were drafted one pick apart. Houston took Stingley third overall. The Jets drafted Sauce fourth overall. They're both corners. So really, this is about as apples to apples as it gets. Stingley just got a contract extension, which reset the market. He was a 3-year contract worth $90 million, and almost all of it was guaranteed. In fact, I think 89 of the $90 million were guaranteed. And that's logical for Sauce to look at that as a benchmark for a deal. Both highly drafted players. They play the same position. They were drafted the same year. They're both looking at contract extension offers this year. Sounds fair to me. In fact, if anything, $30 million may actually be a bit of a bargain for the New York Jets. This, as much as $30 million can be a bargain for any player, from the standpoint that if you compare their first 3 years in the league, Stingley versus Sauce Gardner's been a better player. I mean, I don't think even Houston Texans fans would argue that Derek Stingley Jr. has had a more productive 3-year stretch between 2022 and 2024 than Sauce Gardner has had with the New York Jets. So if you get him for the same amount or close to the same amount, I think that's a win. There's another factor you need to consider. Sometimes we don't think in terms of what a player's job is. At the corner position, obviously your job is to guard wide receivers. And as I mentioned late last week, I think the Jets really need to lean into Sauce's talents this year. Jets are going to play a lot of man-to-man. I think Sauce should spend most of his weeks following the other team's best receiver around the field. And, multiple reasons for that. One is how talented Sauce Gardner is. Another is that the Jets don't have as talented a number 2 corner this year with DJ Reed leaving and Brandon Stevens going in. But just think it through. In the most basic form, corner's job, shut down the other team's best receiver. So how much do good receivers in this league make? Well, there are 8 wide receivers currently on a contract worth $30 million or more. And you think about Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner can hang with the best receivers in the league. Great man-to-man corner. So if the guys he's facing are worth $30 million, the elite receivers in this league, if they're worth $30 million, how is a guy who shuts them down not worth $30 million? If anything, it's a little bit of a bargain because there are 8 receivers making $30 million, and Stingley kind of reset the market with $30 million. So, it's again, like, I don't know if maybe bargain's not the right word, but it's a pretty good deal for the Jets. How about Garrett Wilson? Well, I actually wrote an article on gangreennation.com recently about this, trying to estimate how much Garrett Wilson may cost in a contract extension. Now, what I found with Garrett Wilson is I compared him statistically to other players who recently had similar starts to their careers. So since the rookie wage scale came into effect in 2011, that was kind of what changed the rookie contracts in the league. So 2011 is kind of like the start of this era where rookie contracts are very limited. So since then, Garrett Wilson's one of 8 players to have 1,000 yards in 3 straight seasons to start his career at the wide receiver position. Only 8 guys, 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons to start their careers. They are A.J. Green, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Thomas, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and Garrett Wilson. So, anybody out there who thinks Garrett Wilson's not a great receiver, I mean, listen to some of those names. I mean, those are some very, very good names. A.J. Green, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Thomas, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle. And that's out of Waddle. I mean, those are all guys who were top receivers in the league. So what I did was I took a look at these 7 guys, the other 7 guys. I looked at the second contracts they got. And, you can't compare exact numbers because 10 years ago, A.J. Green signed a contract for $15 million a year, which at the time was a huge amount of money for a wide receiver. Now that's half of what an elite receiver gets because the salary cap keeps going up. So what I did was I looked at their deals as a percentage of the salary cap at the time they signed them. Because, again, $15 million was a ton of money back 10 years ago when the salary cap was much lower. But it's not so much now. So those guys, the 7 guys I mentioned, got an average of a contract. Their second contract averaged 11.5% of the salary cap at the time they signed the deal. It's 11.5% of the salary cap. If you take 11.5% of the salary cap of 2025, it would give Garrett Wilson a contract of around $32 million per year, which again, we just talked about the receiver contracts. There are only 8 guys making $30 million a year. $32 million a year would tie Garrett Wilson with A.J. Green for the 5th highest salary at the wide receiver position. Now, I know some skeptics may say, well, is Garrett Wilson really a top 5 receiver? And that's relevant. I don't think Garrett Wilson's a top 5 receiver. I think maybe we saw him a little short because, again, he's only one of only 8 guys to have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons to start his career in the last 14 years. So that season's a pretty rare. I don't know he's a top 5 receiver, but I also think about what could the Jets do better with $32 million and give it to Garrett Wilson. Again, going back to what we said in the first segment, this genuine star players don't make free agency in this league. It's the guys who have problems. It's the fake stars like Trumaine Johnson, or the guys who are at the end of their careers, like Le'Veon Bell, or somebody I don't want to use CJ Mosley. I don't feel super comfortable using CJ Mosley as an example because he was a good player for the Jets. Also, I love CJ Mosley because he really was a great interview guest when I had him on the show a few years ago. But CJ Mosley is a really good run-stopping linebacker who the Jets paid like an elite defensive end. They paid him like an elite pass rusher in 2019. So even though CJ Mosley was a good player, it's difficult to say the Jets got great value from that deal. You can have this academic discussion. Is Garrett Wilson really a top 5 receiver? Should we pay him top 5 receiver money? You know what? I don't see what a better use of that money would be because in the NFL, there's only one way to build. You draft good players, you develop those players, and then you pay those guys to stay with your team. That's, again, team building 101 in the NFL. So, yes, it would be a big commitment. Yes, you'd have Sauce at $30 million, Garrett at $32 million. It would be quite a lot of money. But you can also structure these deals in a way where maybe one year Sauce has a bigger hit and Garrett has a smaller hit. There are ways to work around this stuff. And it just emphasizes the importance of drafting well, because when you have players making big money, you have to find those cost control players through the draft who can supplement them, who can help them out, who can support them. That's what's critical. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the guy who will be calling plays for Garrett Wilson this year, Tanner Engstrand. He had some interesting comments about the way the Jets offense will function late last week at OTAs, and it gives us some insight into how he's going to try and build this offense. We'll talk about that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. Let's turn our attention to Jets offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand. And Engstrand's a bit of a mystery. His first time being in charge of an offense in the NFL. Previously, he was the passing game coordinator with the Detroit Lions. So coming from a team that had a very successful offense, he and Aaron Glenn know each other well. They both worked with the Lions the last couple of years. So I think there's going to be a comfort level there. But it's always different when you're in charge for the first time. Just as Aaron Glenn is now in charge of a full roster, Tanner Engstrand is now in charge of an offense for the first time. He last couple of years was working under Ben Johnson, so he was really working on implementing Ben Johnson's vision. Now he has a chance to implement his own visions, which always a bit of a mystery. What a new coordinator is really going to bring to the table. We can only look at his past performance with his former employer in the context of that he was working as an assistant. Now this is going to be the Tanner Engstrand offense. He made some interesting comments to the media at OTAs. He said, "We just want to play fast. We want to be physical. We want to be aggressive. We want to be explosive, and we want to be detailed. We want to show up on tape each and every week. When someone looks at our tape, we want those things to show up, and that's what we're going to shoot for." Now, a lot of boilerplate coach speak in that. There's a lot of stuff you will hear from like any new coach who is throwing out cliches left and right. But there was the one thing that I noticed in that comment, his comment that we want to play fast. That's significant to me. Like some of the other stuff, we want to be detailed, we want to be aggressive. That's the stuff any coach will say. But wanting to play fast, I think actually has some significance because in the NFL these days on offense, they're like kind of like these two competing philosophies. You see teams that like to run a lot of motion at the line of scrimmage. And then you see teams that like to play with tempo. And in many ways, these two are kind of mutually exclusive. So, you see teams run a lot of complex motion. It's usually to kind of like help the quarterback out before the play. And at their most basic element, on a passing play, you send a guy in motion. If somebody follows him, the guy in motion, it's a pretty good sign you're going to be facing man-to-man coverage because that's the guy who's covering the man. The guy who's following the receiver is probably covering the man in motion. If nobody follows the guy in motion, odds are you're facing zone coverage because if you're facing man coverage, somebody would be following down the field. Now, defenses disguise their coverages. Defenses have gotten wise to this. So you see some disguise, but it's usually a kind of a giveaway. In many cases, you can figure out whether you're facing man or zone before the play. And then there are also things where you can manipulate the defense. If you're facing zone coverage, and there's an easier matchup on the right side of the field than the left side of the field for a receiver, you'll just motion him to the easier matchup. And also, the way run game assignments are work change. In the run game, typically guys in the front seven are assigned one or two gaps, the gap being the space between an offensive lineman. So the space between a guard and the center, or guard and tackle, or tackle and tight end, or tackle on the end of the line of scrimmage. Usually as a defender, you're assigned one spot, one gap. And when you put a guy in motion, sometimes you change the geometry of the field. Sometimes the gaps change, particularly when you put a tight end in motion and the defense needs to shift. And sometimes when the defense needs to shift, somebody doesn't get the memo and they leave a gap unguarded. So it's the type of thing that can open up a hole for a running back. So you see a lot of these complex motions, and the offenses that run them. I mean, San Francisco does it a lot. The Rams do it a lot. McVay, Shanahan, those guys, they like using motion. The alternative to that is going up tempo, just playing really, really fast, playing with a lot of speed. Now, fans want their teams to do both. You'll always hear fans complain if the team's not doing both complex motions and playing with tempo. But by definition, you can really only do one of the two, because if you're running a lot of motion, well, that requires time. That kind of prevents you from playing up tempo, because playing with tempo means you're snapping the ball immediately. And if you're like sending a bunch of guys in motion, you're sending this guy in motion, then that guy in motion, and maybe faking a reverse with other motion, you're not going to be able to play with the same degree of tempo. The advantages to tempo are, first of all, it forces a defense to play a very basic coverage, because if you're playing really fast, the defense probably can't communicate its play call in. It can't really communicate a complex play call in, because the ball may be snapped before everybody gets the message. At least this day and age, you do have a defender who has like the radio on, communicating with the defensive coordinator, but he's got to be able to communicate the play to all of his teammates. So if the offense is snapping the ball really quick, you have to play very basic coverages, and that makes it easier for an offense to run. Of course, you can also, if you string together a couple of first downs, you can tire out a defense. You can, if you're playing fast, it can be really tough to play, especially if you're stringing together successful plays, because you kind of get the defense on the ropes. You get guys who are really breathing hard, even great athletes who exist in the NFL who are in fantastic shape. It's not easy to play against the team that go up against a team that's playing super fast. And you also limit the defense's ability to substitute, because again, like, they can't run guys off the field. If you're going to snap the ball, they'll either get a too many men on the field penalty, or they'll have somebody who's out of position at the start of the play. So these are like the two ways you can attack a defense. And it's one of the, like, you go back to the Adam Gase days, the Jets had some of the slowest tempo in the league and the lowest motion rates, and drove me crazy, because it's like you have two options, Adam. You can pick one of the two. Can we see a little creativity? We never did with Adam Gase. With better offensive coordinators, you either see them choose one of the two, or you see them mix the both in. Now, you can only take comments from Tanner Engstrand so far when we're in May and June, because the season's not here yet. And depending on how the season goes, you may see some adjustment during the year. If something's not working, the Jets may change it up. But I always look at these press conference comments just for little insights, because most of what you hear is just coach speak. And if you go through that Engstrand statement, I'll read it again. We just want to play fast. We want to be physical. We want to be aggressive. We want to be explosive. We want to be detailed. We want to show up on tape each and every week. When someone looks at our tape, we want those things to show up, and that's what we're going to shoot for. A lot of boilerplate stuff. Now, it could also indicate, when he talks about being detailed, that they're going to focus on the fundamentals, that, they're going to dedicate a lot of their practice time to making sure guys have the ball secure, that guys are using good technique. What you prioritize sometimes says a lot about you as a coach. And as a coach, you can prioritize a couple of things. There's only so much practice time, so you may be prioritizing making sure your schemes are really up to date, that your route combinations are top of the league, which I think is something that's important. But you can also spend practice time instead focused on the fundamentals. So maybe Engstrand's suggesting that the Jets are going to spend a lot of time focusing on the fundamentals. But the biggest thing I took from that is we're going to play fast. Now, of course, some of that might be boilerplate. Just we're going to be really aggressive on the field, the stuff any coach would say. But I get the feeling that Engstrand wants this Jets team to play with tempo, because you think about the quarterback you've got, Justin Fields. If he's a running threat. So if you can rip off a couple big runs, and again, kind of tire guys out on the defense and keep them up, keep that pace going, it's the type of thing that could help the Jets move the ball. But also, Fields, as we know, is kind of an inconsistent passer. So some of the benefits of tempo, again, are you're not going to have to face as many personnel groupings, because if you play up tempo, defense doesn't have enough time to sub out, and you also force the defense to play more vanilla types of coverage. And again, that's the type of thing that could benefit a guy who's still very much developing as a passer in field. So I think very logical comments from Engstrand, and I'll be interested to hear more comments ahead about as this coaching staff continues to take shape and share their philosophy. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back next time to talk